On the last episode of Hops and Gnarly Brewing, I made a Petite Saison and we tested out a couple potential upgrades for my Anvil Foundry. That beer still has some time left in the fermenter, so today I'm shifting my attention to a new project. This is probably one of the more famous examples of a hazy IPA, Juicy Bits from WeldWerks. And whenever I drink a really great beer like this, I like to think about the path the brewer took to get here. This isn't some grain to glass story where someone just planned out an awesome recipe and knocked it out of the park. I don't know all the details, but I'm guessing it took years of wins and losses with all kinds of styles to acquire enough experience to really dial things in. Over the next few episodes, we're diving deep into the world of hazy IPAs and experimenting with each component of beer: water, malt, hops, and yeast. And I don't want to just listen to the best practices. I want to taste the differences for myself and hopefully, over time, get familiar with the things that separate good beers from great beers. Now, let's make some beer. For this beer, I'm using some local spring water and I'm adjusting the water profile using gypsum, calcium chloride, Epsom salt, and canning salt. But here's the kicker. I'm actually brewing two batches, one right after the other. With the first batch, I'm targeting a West Coast IPA water profile with 150 parts per million sulfate and 50 parts per million chloride. The second batch will target basically the opposite, a New England IPA water profile with 100 parts per million sulfate and 200 parts per million chloride. Obviously, I know which one is recommended for this style, but I've never actually tasted the difference side by side. For the grain bill, I'm using some locally malted grains from Proximity Malt. I've got 58% base 2-row, 13.5% each of malted oats and white wheat, and 5% dextrin. While this is just a starting point for the project, it should provide some good body for both batches today and leave room to really evaluate each water profile. Let's get it going. I'll keep mashing this in until everything is nice and saturated and holding steady at our target mash temperature of 152 degrees Fahrenheit or 67 Celsius. Then I'll start a timer for 1 hour. Okay, we've been mashing for over an hour now and we just reached our mash out temperature of 168 Fahrenheit or about 75 Celsius. Time to yank these grains and get our boil started. With the basket up and out of the wort, I'm cranking this thing to full blast. Once we're up to temperature, I'll start a timer for a quick 30-minute boil. All right, we've got 15 minutes left in the boil and it's time to start sanitizing the chiller. Okay, at this point, we haven't added a single hop pellet to this beer, but that's about to change. I'm dropping the temperature to 160 Fahrenheit or 71 Celsius, and it's time to kick off the whirlpool. For this 2.5 gallon batch, I'm adding 7 grams of Citra, and our 30-minute whirlpool timer starts now. It's been 20 minutes and it's time for the next hop addition. Here's 10 more grams of Citra and 10 grams of El Dorado. 10 minutes to go. And just like that, it's time to chill this wort down and get ready for fermentation. As we get close to pitching temperature, I'm oxygenating the wort using an inline diffusion stone from Blickman Engineering. Let me get this thing transferred and then it's on to the next batch. Man, 2 batches in one day is no joke, but that 30-minute boil really helped move things along. Both batches will hang out in these Anvil bucket fermenters during fermentation, and I actually had a local shop weld some tri-clamp fittings to the lid. On top of that, I have butterfly valves and some awesome blow-off arms that I picked up from NorCal Solutions. This setup should make it easier to avoid oxygen when it comes time to dry hop. For these beers, I'm going with Imperial Flagship and a fermentation temperature of 65 degrees Fahrenheit or about 18 degrees Celsius. That should leave a bit of sweetness, a pretty clean taste, and plenty of haze. Within a matter of hours, both batches blasted off and didn't slow down for the next 3 days or so. On day 4, things had mellowed out, so I bumped the temperature up 4 degrees to clean up any off flavors and make sure the yeast was done eating. It's been a couple days since then, and we've landed at a final gravity of 1015. Time for some dry hops. I've got an ounce of Citra and an ounce of El Dorado. Since we're at the end of fermentation, it's important to avoid as much oxygen as possible. That's where this dry hop rig comes into play. I'll close the butterfly valve and connect a sight glass on top. Now, I'll add the dry hops and start purging the oxygen. Add CO2, purge. Add CO2, purge. After repeating this 7 or 8 times, I'll pull the butterfly valve open and wiggle that thing until they've all dropped into the fermenter. Now, I'll repeat the process with the second batch. In total, I've used just under 3 ounces of hops for each batch, which is probably on the low side for a 2.5 gallon batch. But I want to make sure I'm leaving room to really experience the differences between each water profile. 2 days later, I cold crashed, then I kegged it, carbed it, and now I'm ready to package it up with this. This is the SL1 from October Design, made specifically for homebrewers. In addition to the Seamer, October also sent me some 16-ounce cans, and I can't wait to try this out. I've got my CO2 tank going to a regulator which feeds into the keg and my Blickman beer gun. After a quick CO2 purge, I'll slowly fill each can from the bottom before placing a lid on top of the foam. Next, I'll pop the can into the Seamer, lift it into place, and turn on the SL1. Finally, I'll push the lever to the right, push it to the left, and boom, a fully branded can of Hops and Gnarly beer. There's just something about it. It feels so real and also kind of magic at the same time. Now, I'll just repeat the process until I'm out of beer. It's been a couple weeks since brew day and it's time for a head-to-head battle. First, let's take a look at batch A, the West Coast water profile. It's a bright straw color and has a nice white head. And here's batch B, the New England IPA water profile. It really depends a lot on the lighting, but Meg and I both thought batch B looked slightly darker than batch A, but there were basically no visual differences. Batch A aroma was pronounced and full of citrus. It tastes refreshing and fairly dry with lots of citrus and maybe like a melon type flavor. Batch B has less aroma but also smells citry with almost a little bit of vanilla. And honestly, I was expecting a huge difference in mouthfeel, but they're pretty similar. Where the difference comes in is the bitterness, or at least the perception of bitterness. Batch B seems to just have softer edges than batch A. It doesn't feel fluffier, it tastes fluffier. We even did a completely unscientific test, and I had a pretty hard time telling them apart. To some, that might sound like maybe water doesn't matter all that much. But another way to take it is these minor nuances add up. And it's almost impossible to evaluate a single component without running into another. As we continue through this project, we might have to come back to things, make adjustments, and see where it takes us. And that's just fine with me. This episode of Hops and Gnarly Brewing was made possible by these awesome partners. If you like this video, let me know in the comments and consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you again soon.